Let's meet at the library. Okay.
Hi everyone, it's Julia and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is the first in my Breaking Down the Bard series, in which we dive into Shakespeare and make him more accessible to everyone, because honestly, Shakespeare is so great. I have an Instagram story where I just cried thinking about like the longevity and the power that that man had. I want everyone to be able to read and enjoy and love Shakespeare. So today we are doing the very, very basics, how to get started reading Shakespeare. So the three main topics we're going to talk about is how to prepare yourself, how to choose what to read, and then tips for while you are reading it. All right, the first things that we're going to talk about in how to prepare are a little more nerdy, but honestly they're like the least important aspect of this, so I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. The first issue that is like the big red flag for everyone who wants to attempt reading Shakespeare is, how do I understand early modern English? What even is early modern English? That's a great question. Said me to myself, I'm the one who asked it. So what we speak today is called modern English, and it obviously is a language that has changed over time. And in Shakespeare's day, it was almost like how we talk today, but it was different. So if you are a scholar or a linguist or someone of that nature, you know that it was early modern English. So it's not like old medieval English that's like, is this even the same language? It's like bridging the gap. And it's not that hard. It seems hard, but it's not that hard, I promise you. The biggest things that a lot of people are going to notice are like some weird pronouns like thou, which is just an informal second person pronoun, or like ye, hear ye. It's just a plural pronoun. Or you might notice some weird verb forms. One of the like present tense verb forms that was a thing in early modern English is that eth ending that everyone does when you want to sound like fake Shakespearean. So instead of hate, it would be hateth. But you may also see the word hates in Shakespeare plays. Both forms were a thing in early modern English. Or like the past tense will sometimes be ist. So like, thou gavest it to me. That might not even be fully grammatically correct. So it just means gave, it's past tense. But honestly, I can keep listing things, but it's all contextual. I promise you that when you're in the moment, you're reading it in a full sentence where you understand what's going on and who's talking to who, it's not as hard to decipher as you think. If you're someone who's nerdy like me and actually like enjoys learning about those things, literally just Google early modern English, and like, we don't even have to get fancy. Go to the Wikipedia page, scroll down to where it says grammar, have yourself a grand old time. I think it's a little bit easier to understand if you're someone who is either a non-English speaker, ironically, or someone who has learned another language, because if you're a native English speaker and that's the only language you've ever spoken, you don't always think about like first, second, third person, or like formal and informal second person is not really a thing in English unless you count like y'all. But yeah, it's really not that hard, I promise. You may also be very frightened because you've heard a little phrase called iambic pentameter, and you're wondering, what is iambic pentameter? Does it matter? Short answer, no, not to you, the reader, honestly. So the fastest and simplest way to explain iambic pentameter is that is just the meter or the rhythm that Shakespeare wrote in. It's not only a Shakespeare thing, it is like one of the most common meters across the history of the English language, very common of his time particularly. And so iambic means that there's these syllables that are like unaccented and then accented. So like the word above, that above is the accented syllable. And then pentameter means that there's 5 of those ba-bums in a phrase or in like one line that he wrote. So every line of Shakespeare's writing, kind of, he's a rule breaker, has 10 syllables in it, like, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And you'll notice it sounds like a heartbeat. That's the easiest way to remember it. But you don't have to read it like that. So there's actually a lot of like arguments over whether that was emphasized when Elizabethan actors were performing in iambic pentameter, or whether that's just kind of the natural flow because he tended to choose words that would fit in that that meter naturally. So the important thing is just follow the punctuation. That's where the line breaks are, but that isn't how you need to read. When there's a comma, you give a little pause. When there's a period, you pause. That's the end of the sentence. But don't worry about all the weird formatting. And honestly, like, low-key doesn't matter. I'm probably like a bad Shakespeare fan to say so. But it just like, it makes it seem hard when it's not, I promise you. You'll also notice as you read Shakespeare that he often breaks those rules. So if you're like trying to read it and you're like, this doesn't have the 10 syllables that you said, it's dramatic effect, baby. He's gonna break those rules. He's gonna be like, I want 11 syllables in this line. Or he might like break up the meter between one character's line and then finish it in another's. There's a lot of weird things that he does. You'll notice like rhyming couplets where like one line and the next line rhyme, but not all of Shakespeare rhymes. It's not one giant poem. Yeah. So long answer short, don't worry about it. Finally, this is the easiest way to prepare yourself. Watch an adaptation. Like, it's that easy. Watch a play, online or in person, probably not in person in this given climate, but maybe eventually. Watch a movie adaptation. First of all, many of them are so wonderful, so they're just like enjoyable, period. But they really help. They help you absorb the story, get an ear for the language, kind of contextualize all these things you're hearing. And yes, I think it's totally okay to watch it before you read it. In fact, I personally encourage watching Shakespeare before reading Shakespeare. But that's just me. Time for section 2, choosing what to read. My first tip here is very easy. Go with something that's familiar to you. There are a lot of Shakespearean stories that are very, very, very common in pop culture. If you try to look me in the eye right now and tell me you've never heard of Romeo and Juliet, you can just click off this video. You're lying. Don't lie to me. I know you know Romeo and Juliet. Going with something you already know makes it easier to understand the bits that you might not be as familiar with because you know the overarching story and who the main characters are. It's just less to keep straight in your brain because you already have the basic foundation and you're just building on top of it with more detail. So Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet, things that you've seen and heard of and kind of have like a vague grasp on, not a bad place to start. You could also take the route of choosing to start with a shorter or more straightforward play. There's a lot of comedies that are pretty cut and dry. The Comedy of Errors was one of Shakespeare's earliest. It's super short. There's only like 10 main characters, really easy to get through. Twelfth Night is one of my favorite Shakespearean comedies, and although Twelfth Night has a lot of like disguises and miscommunication and all of that silly stuff, it's still pretty cut and dry with like what it is. It's not too crazy. If you wanted like a darker play, Othello is another one of my favorites, and it really has quite a small set of main characters again. Like really, there's only like 6 characters who actually matter in Othello. So yeah. Also, when choosing what to read, it might be helpful to know some of the common conventions and tropes of the genres that Shakespeare wrote in. If you want something light and fluffy and romantic, you could probably go for a comedy. Comedies tend to involve a lot of mistaken identities, and there's usually twins or cross-dressing or both. Viola, I'm looking at you. And they almost always end with a wedding. Or a double wedding. Sometimes a triple wedding. I'm not kidding. Meanwhile, you have tragedies that end with everyone dying. So they're a lot darker, but you know, if you like some angst, if you like an anti-hero, the tragedies are the place for you to go. It's also important to bear in mind that Shakespeare wrote history plays, but these are works of historical fiction, okay? Like, I was afraid of the histories because I'm like, I never learned about the War of the Roses in school. I'm not going to understand any of this. It's historical fiction. Like, all of the events are pretty much real. All of the characters are real people or based on real people, but they are Shakespeare's interpretations and biases of all these events. So like, clearly they're very favoritive of the British characters and like just things like that. So they're not that scary because, like, you know, it's like reading Philippa Gregory. It's like, yeah, sure, Anne Boleyn was real, but like, is this book really about her? No, it's just kind of about her. Last up, these are my tips about how to read Shakespeare. First off, buy an edition that helps you. I'm so serious. Don't go for the prettiest one, because the prettiest one is just going to be the text and you're going to be like, why did I do this to myself? No Fear Shakespeare is literally a godsend. It's amazing. My not first, maybe like second Shakespeare that I read independently for fun was a No Fear Shakespeare, and it helped me a ton. I think I was in like 9th grade. I was just nerding out by myself. So if you're reading an edition of No Fear Shakespeare, it has the classic text on one page, and then on the page opposite, it has line by line a modern English translation. So if it's like, get thee to a nunnery, next to it on the other page, you're gonna read run away to a nunnery, or like go to a nunnery. So it's like very straightforward. It's a little more literal, and like some of the lines sound really stupid when you just translate it to modern English, but it's so, so helpful if you're like super scared. If you're like a little less cautious, but still would like some help, I highly recommend the Folger's Library edition of any Shakespeare play. I collect them because there's a lot of room for annotating, but they are a little bit similar in that the text is only on one side of any given pair of pages, but on the other side it's all like footnotes explaining certain words or what the character might mean, or like, oh, he's referring to this mythological story. So it's just helpful if you want more like cultural information about what they're saying. So those are really great as well. This next tip might be the most useful one in the entire video. That is to read scene summaries as you go. You can do it on SparkNotes. If you have a Folger's edition, it has it before every scene. But when you are starting a scene in a Shakespeare play, just read a paragraph of what happens in that scene. I promise you, it's going to help you so much to just like put on your reader glasses and be like, okay, I'm focusing on this because it says in this scene that so-and-so tries to trick so-and-so, but this happens instead. Like, it's just so much easier to know what you're getting into instead of diving into a new scene that you can't see. You know, when you're watching a play, you can see the set change. You can see, you know, like where and when they are in the story. Shakespeare's actual plays, when you're reading them, have very little stage direction. There's not a lot of like, you see this, or the character is holding XYZ. Like, it's really mostly just like enter, exit, and like a couple of small details. So it's really beneficial to just like get the context of the scene that you're in. My next tip is to use these plays the way they were intended, i.e. listen to them. If you're like me, you might enjoy reading the plays out loud or even like whispering them to yourself like a weirdo. Sometimes it's just fun to read some Shakespeare. It helps you like understand what the character is saying better because you're actually hearing it from a human and you're not like trying to break it apart word by word and be like, huh? It just flows. Or alternately, you could listen to like a full cast audiobook as you're reading. Again, Folger has really great ones. I've listened to their edition of Macbeth, which I really liked. I think that's the only one just because I don't tend to do Shakespeare as audiobooks, or plays in general as audiobooks, because you don't like, you know, hear which character is which the way you see on the page. But it helps a ton if you're doing that together. And I know a lot of people already just like to listen to an audiobook as they read the physical book, so same difference. I wouldn't do it with like a play or a movie though, because often those are shortened or condensed, or things can change. So I would go for like an actual audiobook on that if you want to listen. And finally, annotate if you feel inclined. I think Shakespeare is like one of the most fun things to annotate because you notice different things as you become more familiar with Shakespeare, and your annotation style will change as you reread things if you do that like I do. So, you know, your early annotations might be like, what are they talking about here? And then you look it up and you write a note to yourself like, oh, this means this. And you also might just like underline a famous quote or like a line that's really beautiful to you. But then the next time you read it, you might start to pick up on some themes and be like, whoa, I'm reading The Taming of the Shrew, and there sure is a lot of talk about women as commodity. I'm going to start keeping track of all the times that happens, or, you know, whatever. I think it's just fun. It brings more meaning to the text, and it's really fun to look back on later. Okay, I've been filming for 20 minutes, so we need to wrap it up so this can be like an approachable video and not a scary video. In the same way I'm trying to do that for Shakespeare, I'm like making my own bed and making this video even a little unapproachable. So just like stop talking, Julia. Stop talking. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're able to use some of these tips. Let me know down in the comments if you already do any of these or which tip you think is going to be most helpful for your enjoyment of Shakespeare. Also be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and that'll let me know that I should continue this series and not just let it be a one-off. I really want to dive deep into like comedies, tragedies, have a video all about sonnets. I didn't even talk about the sonnets in this video because they're just like an entirely separate thing. Like we can't do that right now. Thanks again for watching, and you'll see more from me soon. Bye!